The past has not disappeared completely. Its traces remain among us, in texts, in ruins, in objects, in memories. But every trace holds a question, and every great investigation begins with a question. Imagine that almost everything humanity had ever written had vanished. Entire libraries consumed by fire, cities reduced to ruins, peoples, kings, and empires erased by time, books that no one can read anymore, stories from which only a few lines remain, or a name carved into stone. When we speak of Troy, Egypt, Babylon, Athens, or Rome, we believe we are speaking of worlds we know, but none of those worlds reached us whole. The past was not preserved as a complete story. It survived in fragments, in broken tablets, in incomplete inscriptions, in manuscripts copied again and again, in objects buried beneath the earth, in forgotten ruins, and also in the memories of people who continued telling ancient stories, generation after generation. And yet, after thousands of years, we still know names, events, poems, wars, cities, and ideas born in civilizations that no longer exist. How was this possible? How do we still know so much about the past when so many books, libraries, and civilizations have disappeared? It was this question that gave rise to the Memory and Civilization collection, and with it, our investigation begins. For thousands of years, men and women wrote about the world in which they lived. They recorded laws, they narrated wars, they described cities, they explained their beliefs, they told the stories of kings, merchants, priests, and travelers. But most of that knowledge never reached us. Entire libraries disappeared. Shelves filled with papyrus scrolls were reduced to ashes. Others were abandoned, slowly defeated by moisture, time, and oblivion. Cities that had once been centers of power vanished from the map. Palaces collapsed. Temples were destroyed. Archives ceased to exist. Entire languages were no longer understood. For centuries, inscriptions remained before everyone's eyes, yet no one was able to read them. Wars accelerated this loss. Fires consumed collections, looting scattered documents, conquests erased traditions, and time completed what human beings had begun. When we look at antiquity, we often imagine a past that was preserved, but the truth is exactly the opposite. What survived represents only a small part of what once existed. Every preserved manuscript is an exception. Every readable inscription is a survivor. Every object uncovered by an archaeologist has endured centuries of destruction. And this makes our question even more intriguing. If almost everything disappeared, how can we still reconstruct the history of entire civilizations? That is the investigation we will continue in the next block. After so much has been lost, one inevitable question remains. How do we still know anything about the ancient world? The answer is not found in a single book, nor in a single discovery. It was built through the patient work of thousands of people over many centuries. Archaeologists uncover forgotten cities. Historians compare documents written in different ages. Linguists decipher languages that remained silent for thousands of years. Conservators restore manuscripts nearly destroyed by time. Every fragment recovered, every preserved inscription, every coin, every vessel, every piece of a mural becomes part of an enormous puzzle. No single discovery tells the whole story, but when these pieces of evidence are brought together, they begin to speak to one another. That is how vanished cities return to the map, how ancient kings recover their names, how forgotten peoples come back into the light of history. History is not built upon a single proof. It emerges from hundreds, sometimes thousands, of small pieces of evidence scattered across time. It is through this patient reconstruction that our knowledge of the past is born.
But who turns fragments into history? It is not the work of a single person. Archaeologists excavate buried cities and recover the objects time concealed. Epigraphers read nearly erased inscriptions, giving voice again to kings, merchants, priests, and ordinary people. Specialists restore fragile manuscripts, page by page, before their final words disappear. Historians compare accounts, dates, coins, maps, and ruins. Linguists decipher forgotten languages and trace the paths traveled by entire peoples. Science has also become an ally in this investigation. DNA analysis reveals ancient migrations. Climate studies help explain droughts, harvests, crises, and disappearances. Astronomy helps place events in time. No single piece of evidence can tell the whole story. But when every fragment is placed beside the others, a lost world begins to reappear. That is how the past ceases to be silence and speaks to us once again. Finding evidence is only the beginning. An ancient sword does not by itself reveal who once held it. A ruin cannot explain on its own why a city disappeared. A manuscript may survive for centuries, yet reach us incomplete, altered, or copied by unknown hands. That is why studying the past demands caution. Historians must not turn hypotheses into certainty. They ask who created each document, why it was made, and for whom it was written. They compare different versions. They search for what was said and for what was left silent. The past does not offer ready-made answers. It requires patience, doubt, and disciplined imagination. And it is precisely at the boundary between what we know and what we still seek that history becomes an adventure. Before they were written, great events lived in the human voice. For generations, stories of kings, sailors, warriors, and vanished cities passed from one person to another. They were remembered beside the fire, sung at celebrations, and repeated by travelers crossing the Greek world. Each storyteller preserved something, and at the same time changed something. From this vast world of memory came the poems attributed to Homer. We do not know with certainty who Homer was. Perhaps a poet, perhaps the name tradition gave to many singers and reciters, perhaps a bridge between centuries of voices that refused to disappear. The Iliad and the Odyssey were not born as silent books. They were born to be heard. They preserved names, gestures, grief, and hope from a past that was already becoming distant. But they are not an exact photograph of that past. They are poetry, memory, and imagination joined in a single inheritance. That is why, when we listen to Homer, we do not hear only one poet. We hear an entire world trying not to be forgotten.
For generations, we have kept this secret hidden from the kings, waiting for the true heir.
An ancient story does not become a historical source simply because it survived. It must be questioned. Who told it? When was it told? Why did it survive? What did it choose to remember? And what did it allow to disappear? Myths, poems, and legends should not be read as exact accounts of events. They were created to move people, to teach, to celebrate heroes, and to give meaning to the world. But that does not make them useless. A tradition may preserve place names, customs, fears, beliefs, and memories of peoples who no longer exist. It may reveal how a society saw its kings, its gods, its wars, and death itself. The historian's task is not only to ask, did this happen exactly as it is told? It is to ask, what can this narrative help us understand? Sometimes a legend does not lead us directly to a fact, but it may lead us to the world that made that fact possible. That is why history does not destroy myths. It places them in dialogue with ruins, objects, inscriptions, documents, and other voices. And in that dialogue, an ancient story can become a source. Finding evidence does not end an investigation. Sometimes that is the moment when the questions become more difficult. A text may describe a city in one way. An excavation may reveal another. A tradition may preserve the name of a king. But no object ever found may confirm that he existed. Two ancient sources may tell the same event and disagree about almost everything: the people involved, the causes, the date, and the outcome. That does not mean that one of them is simply useless. Every piece of evidence was produced by someone, somewhere, for a reason. A poem may praise a hero. An inscription may celebrate a ruler. A ruin may remain silent about the people who built it. The historical investigator does not search only for a quick answer. They compare versions, they observe absences, they recognize contradictions, and they accept that in many cases complete certainty will not be possible. Doubt is not a weakness of history. It is a form of honesty. When evidence disagrees, it does not prevent investigation. It shows us that the past is more complex than any single story. No piece of evidence speaks alone. An object found in an excavation may show that people lived in a certain place, but by itself, it rarely explains who they were, what they believed, or why they built their world. A text may mention a city, an inscription may preserve a name, an oral tradition may remember a catastrophe. Taken separately, every trace has limits, but when different sources begin to point in the same direction, something important happens. A name recorded in a document may also appear in an inscription. A layer of destruction may correspond to the period remembered by a tradition. A coin may help date a place mentioned by an ancient writer. This is corroboration. It is not the search for one isolated and final proof.
The markings
it is
on
the
this piece are
gradual
extraordinary.
convergence
Agreed.
of different kinds
Let's
of
record the
evidence,
exact context
each with its
before
own
removal.
strengths and weaknesses. The more independent these sources are, the greater the confidence we may place in a conclusion. But corroboration does not mean absolute certainty. It means that a hypothesis has endured the questions, the comparisons, and the limits of the available evidence. That is how a small discovery stops being only a silent object. It becomes part of a larger story. And little by little, the past begins to take shape. The past cannot be visited. We cannot watch an ancient city while it is being built. We cannot ask a poet what they meant. We cannot hear directly the voices of those who lived thousands of years ago. What we have are traces, incomplete texts, buried objects, worn inscriptions, transmitted memories, ruins, silences, absences. With them, the historian works like an investigator. They gather evidence, they ask who produced it, they compare versions, they seek confirmation, they recognize contradictions, they build hypotheses, and they honestly measure how far the evidence can take them. Some conclusions are strong, others are possible, others remain uncertain. That difference matters. History does not offer a time machine, it offers a method for approaching a world that no longer exists. Its purpose is not to turn doubts into artificial certainties. It is to understand what the evidence allows us to say and to recognize what it does not yet allow us to say. Every great investigation begins with a question, and every true answer begins with the courage to say, we still do not know everything, but we know enough to keep searching. Every investigation into the past begins in the same way, with a question, but the answers we seek depend on what managed to survive the passage of time. Texts, objects, ruins, and traditions crossed centuries to reach us. Others disappeared forever, and that leads us to a new question. How did civilizations preserve their memories? What we have seen today was only the beginning. In the next episode of Chronicles of Antiquity, we will continue the investigation in the memory of civilizations, because understanding the past requires following every piece of evidence to its ultimate consequences.